Hello, everybody. Welcome to the inaugural version of the Metabochondriacs podcast. Your two hosts for this ongoing series are Dr. Ryan Cooley, off to my side, and I am Brett Smith. And we've been, you could almost say, lifelong friends. We've known each other since we were teenage tennis players, taking tennis lessons together, went through college, and we're teaching tennis pros at different clubs together and played some men's doubles tournaments together. And later in life, we've continued playing racket sports with and against each other and remain friends. And we each have our own individual metabolic health journeys, which has wound up leading to this podcast. So, Ryan, would you like me to start off with my 10,000 foot view, or do you want to give yours?
Yeah, go ahead. You lead the way.
Okay. So, as I mentioned, my name's Brett Smith, and I have a background in the risk management, population health management, and pharma worlds. That's where I spent my professional career. Back in 2018, I had a little bit of, you could say, an awakening. And at a family dinner, I saw my younger brother lost a lot of weight. I'm like, I wonder how he did that. He told me, he said, I did this low carb keto thing. And that's all that was said that night. A couple days later, after completely failing in an athletic endeavor with another friend as a doubles partner, I got to figure out how to lose this weight. I kind of deep dived. I started looking into what is this keto low carb thing. And some of what I was finding sounded very, very dangerous to me based on my background of selling clinical guidelines and disease management programs. So I thought, oh my God, my younger brother's going to be a skinny guy in a casket. And I went and started deep diving things to see if I could find the definitive research to potentially show him that he might be harming himself. And 60 hours later in November, I started saying, I just kind of broke my own brain, because I started realizing much of what I thought much of our medical foundation was built on is, I'll just be as politically correct as possible and say, it's incomplete. There's an awful lot of things that are in the medical literature that you can find on PubMed that I'm sure Ryan will confirm weren't taught when he was in med school. And as I go and look at what's being taught in the med schools now, it's still not a part of the curriculum. Anyhow, as I put about 60 hours in November, December in 2018 in, I made the conclusion to jump in and start practicing what I was learning, even though I phased in slightly in December 2018. And in the first 9 months of 2019, I lost 115 pounds in 9 months. We'll come back to other elements of that journey, other health challenges that I didn't realize for a couple months that I had. Ryan, tell me about your beginning with understanding metabolic health, or your metabolic health journey.
Awesome, Brett. Thanks for that intro. As the audience probably knows, I'm a physician, and I've been a practicing electrophysiologist, which is a subspecialty of cardiology, for 25 years. And so I'm a physician, but I'm also a cardiac patient. And it really, my journey really began probably around the age of 30, when I started to take more seriously a very bad family history that involved premature coronary cardiac events, heart attacks, and sudden death. My father was a victim to this at age 35, had bypassed when he was 36, and unfortunately had sudden death at age 58. So when I was 30, I started seeing a cardiologist with a view towards prevention of these problems. And for the next 22 years, I thought I was doing all the right things, following conventional advice, with lifestyle factors. We can dive into that in more detail. But despite those efforts, had a heart attack at age 52. And that's when Brett and I really started to engage in this idea of metabolic dysfunction and how we can achieve metabolic health. Um, and then over the next 6 years, I did implement some significant changes. Interestingly, during the first 22 years, I knew about a lipid risk marker in the form of Lp(a). But I also knew of generalized lipid panel abnormalities. But those abnormalities were described to me as a genetic problem. And so, interestingly, for 22 years, I failed to recognize that this was just atherogenic dyslipidemia.
Okay, now put that in layman terms, because 90% of the people are going to hear this don't know what that means.
Yeah, so it's a profile of a preponderance of small, dense LDL as contrasted with large, buoyant LDL. And so it's not really necessarily, I mean, I think when you have small, dense LDL, you do tend to have higher LDL-C by modern day standards. But I actually never really did. My LDL-C was always around 100, so not terribly striking, and nothing that would be acted on if you were somebody that was not felt to have coronary heart disease. Now they want to get under 70 if you have CAD, and that cut point seems to continue to move south. Now cardiologists are talking about LDL-C of 30 or 40.
That doesn't help sell any more prescriptions, does it?
Oh no, not at all. And so there's an LDL component of metabolic dyslipidemia, metabolic atherogenic dyslipidemia, small dense LDL, and then there's typically high triglyceride, and I consider above 100 as problematic. The usual labs will reference 150 as the upper bound.
Mm-hmm.
And then lowish HDL, and I think it's less than 40 for a male and less than 50 for a female.
Yeah.
So when you have that triad, you are pretty much guaranteed that you've got metabolic dysfunction, and it's the metabolic dysfunction that's driving those changes.
And also kind of three of the constellation markers of metabolic syndrome. You start putting central fat adiposity in there and blood pressure in there, and suddenly, you have three of those, and of those five, and you now have metabolic syndrome, which again probably doesn't come up in any routine doctor visits with patients. But anyhow, go ahead.
Yeah. And so I after that heart attack, I fully switched from a low fat, low cholesterol diet to a whole food plant-based diet for several months, and was then tested by another lipidologist that I met, and was diagnosed with insulin resistance. And it was quite apparent to her. It was kind of funny interview, because she looked at me and said, "Why hasn't anybody, said this to you? Your problem is insulin resistance." And it's kind of interesting, because I don't know if it was Gerald Reaven, but somebody has the quote of, if you have CAD, you're either diabetic or you're an undiagnosed diabetic.
That's exactly where that came out of. Absolutely. And
that was me, right? And this was despite some weight loss on that whole food plant-based diet. I had peaked at 185 pounds, but keep in mind, I weighed 140 to 150 in college, and I was a college athlete.
Yeah.
And so, 30, 35, 40 pounds was enough to exceed my personal fat threshold. And I lost about 20 and still was insulin resistant. And I just think, for me, the diet was driving all of that.
Well, let's cut off there for just a quick second on that part of the story. Circle back a little bit, and we can start talking about kind of where we started chatting about all of this kind of stuff. And because I think there's interesting context and nuance in here that people might find interesting. And I had said that, after I started losing all that weight, I suddenly realized, so about 55 pounds in of my 115-pound weight loss, I decided, oh my God, I need to get back into the population health management world, wellness, disease management. I had been gone for a few years, partially because I stopped looking like I could be part of that industry. I wasn't a poster child for your typical aerobics or bodybuilder that we visualize as being a picture of health and wellness. But I wound up jumping back into another disease management company. And I was so excited when I got back in, because I'm like, oh my God, I've learned all these new things that I can go make an impact in the world. Because almost everybody I've talked to in those first 3-4 months, they were like deer in headlights. They couldn't understand. They weren't grasping what I was talking about. Was not part of the normal vernacular in the doctor healthcare world, in the coaching world, in any aspect touching healthcare. I just realized I'm bringing new ideas that nobody else is paying attention to. And when I got the job, I got super excited and I started pacing in my office. And I'm like, oh my God, this is awesome. I'm going to go help change the world. I'm going to be thin in a few more months, and I'm not on metformin. I'm not on one of the old blood pressure medications, an ARB that I used to sell in my pharma days. And I'm just like, this is amazing. And all of a sudden it hit me. And I go, oh my God, I am an idiot, because I realized that two things that had been weighing heavily on me for the previous 4 or 5 months as I went down this whole journey and rabbit hole is that, one, when I realized disease management should be disease reversal, there shouldn't be a type 2 diabetic. There's nobody that has to be a type 2 diabetic. There's nobody that has to be hypertensive. There's nobody that, depending upon how bad the kidneys are now, where their EGFR is, they don't have to be on dialysis or keep moving towards dialysis. And this is the same thing with heart problems. This is the same thing now with mental health. I understand we're not going to get into all of these things today. That's what future episodes are for. But I realized that, part of my epiphany was finding a couple of doctors and researchers that became instrumental in the forming of a company called Virta Health. And when I said, oh my God, I'm an idiot, it's because there's a guy who's a billionaire who is the financial founder of Virta Health, and he won the 15 over Ironman competition a few years before, came back from that, did a doctor's appointment, and found out that he was so pre-diabetic, he was almost on the cusp of having a 6.5, and now you're magically a diabetic, as the medical world would tell you. Brian and I now believe for 15 years you were diabetic, just in a different, stage of it, or with different, we just don't recognize it then. Anyhow, so he went and did a whole, I'm sure, deeper dive than what I did, but I found them, and he found the same doctors that I was finding, Dr. Stephen Finney, Dr. Tom Volek, and Dr. Sarah Hallberg, and they all together created Virta Health, and they were in the disease management world, my old world, but with the disease reversal flavor to it all. So they were calling on Fortune 500 companies saying, okay, give us your diabetics. We're going to turn them into non-diabetics without any medications. And you're going to save about $14,000 to $16,000 per patient, per person per year. And here's our fee to do that. And they've been wildly successful, enough so now that United Healthcare, the largest insurance company in the country, has a competing company called Level 2. Anyhow, I remember that this guy who won the 50 Ironman, far better athlete than I'm probably ever going to be, was a type 2. And then Jim Fixx, the best-selling author for the complete book of running, when we were both in college, or at least you were in high school, I was in college, a couple of years older, that he died on a 5K run at 52, looking like a Greek god from a physique standpoint and a health standpoint. Nobody realized he also was probably an undiagnosed diabetic to some degree and had a heart attack on the run. And it hit me, and I'm like, oh my God. I 10 years earlier at 45 had my first CT heart scan, as just kind of better understanding the protocol for people that we would identify as heart risk, and then getting them through risk stratification, and then potentially maybe get a stent if we find out that the disease is there. and I had a 0 score. And with all of that, it hit me in my head when I said, Brett, you're an idiot. Being thin and not on medications doesn't mean you're healthy. Go get another.
Were you thin at age 45?
Excuse me?
Were you thin at age 45?
Not what I would call thin. Not like what you and I used to remember me as thin.
Yeah.
I mean, I was carrying another 35 to 40 on me at that time, but being 6'3" and wearing a lot of suits, I could kind of carry that a little better.
Do you recall having any biomarkers of concern back then?
Well, interesting. Great question. And we haven't even had this question or these back and forth. So this is really live, folks. I knew that back when I first started getting what we'll call adult blood tests and everything, they always were curious about my cholesterol. They're like, you kind of run a little high on cholesterol. They never, we didn't talk about HDL, LDL. It was just, this is the mid 80s. Nobody talked about fractionization of anything or different types of lipoproteins. It was just cholesterol. And, and in that first year out of college, my doctor, Dr. Reish, he saw that I put like 30 pounds on, and he would say to me, he goes, Brett, your heart has to work that much harder because there's all these new capillaries and blood vessels that are going through this fat tissue. And to move the blood through all of it, you're working harder. You should probably lose that. And so, yeah, I'm one of those guys who, 40 cold calls a day, eating at McDonald's, working in the office late, eating crap, eating a Tombstone pizza when I got home. And I immediately, a lot of root beer shakes at some of the frozen custard places that I worked near. Anyhow, so no, I put on rapid weight, but like you, Ryan, and you'll remember this from when we grew up, I graduated college 6'2", 140. High school, 6'2", 140. I graduated college 6'3", 167. The joke was I was so skinny I had to run around in the shower just to get wet. The water would go right by me. Just insane. And then I plumped out right away. Initially, I didn't mind it too much because I started to looking like, instead of looking like a dweeby little skinny tennis guy, I almost looked like I could have been on a football team or something. And for whatever reason, that kind of was okay with me for a while. But no, so outside of a little bit of elevated cholesterol, my blood pressure always looked good. There weren't other markers that people were grasping. And I didn't even, one more thing I'll throw in here. So with selling corporate wellness programs, the cornerstone of the program I sold for 10 years was a health risk assessment that with a blood panel forecasted 40 different pre-disease conditions. So there were algorithms, and my job was to go sell to the medical directors at all of the consulting firms and the large brokerage houses that did large employee benefit programs for large employers. These are the tools you should use. And your old employer bought them and resold them as tools. And I went and resold all their clients for them. But we actually, right before I started with the company, I learned they took metabolic syndrome off of the results, which would have found me 10 years earlier or maybe 15 years earlier than I did. And the reason is we put a dollar amount into each condition that came back with a active condition or pre-disease condition and put it into a financial return on investment opportunity model. And once you included metabolic syndrome and everything that it represents, employers were freaking out. They couldn't handle the price tag. And they thought, you guys are full of bullshit. And so thinking, okay, well, we already have hypertension in there. We already have diabetes in there. We already, there wasn't dyslipidemia or anything like that. But, we said, well, with hypertension, diabetes, that'll work. Had it been kept in there, I would have figured this out 15 years earlier.
Yeah.
So anyhow, but I went and got a repeat CT heart scan, and I found out that I had a score of 268. And from my previous 0, and I started realizing the stress, all the different things going on in my life, not handling stress correctly. And we all have stress. You live in this world, you have stress. And anyhow, so I'm just like, oh my God.
What was the interval between those scans?
10 years.
Okay.
10 years.
Yep.
10 years and 60 to 70 pounds. Extra from being a constant 30 pounds overweight at that point, I was I was now down from of the 115. I was down 50 of it, so I was still 70 pounds overweight at that moment.
Yeah.
But thank God I had learned during this deep dive, thinking I'm saving my brother's life potentially. And I wind up realizing, oh, well, almost everything, all of these things are reversible. So then I deep dived into Ivor and Patrick Tewitt and all these different people where I figured out, how do you reverse these things? So let's go forward. And I think there's a nugget or two, or if nothing else, funny anecdote from when your brother told me, Brett, did you hear about Ryan's heart attack? Do you want to tell that story?
Yeah. I mean, your memory of it is probably better than mine. So you can kind of, editorialize as I go along. But my, I guess my memory of it is not very detailed, but in general,
That's what
we
cognitive dissonance
I
does.
know, yeah, exactly. We had met up to play pickleball and started talking about what happened to me, and I was recovered by that point, and I think I was on my whole food plant-based journey at that point, and you basically, I think you were nice about it.
A little bit. I
You were,
laughed a little at you at one of the things you're doing. We'll
yeah,
get to that.
yeah, but I think that you started to talk about nutrient density and you know your views at that time on better ways to lose weight, restore metabolic health, etc. Um, and I viewed those strategies as a killer, right? Because they were higher cholesterol foods, saturated fat foods, um, and I just didn't view at that time carbohydrates as something that was threatening. And so I kind of just blew you off, I basically, and said that, hey, I threw the appeal to authority argument on you, and I said, I'm a cardiologist. I know what I'm doing. And your face,
And thank God I worked for doctors and with doctors my whole life, and I'm a little bit of not that easy to push off, and I just kind of fought back a little. I said, "Screw that,"
yeah. But I think that while I lacked a degree of curiosity about these things for 20 some years, I was an electrophysiologist, right? So all of my efforts were at keeping abreast of my highly specialized field of clinical practice. And so all of my efforts were basically spent in electrophysiology. And now and as opposed to really focusing on prevention and disease reversal of all cardiovascular disease, because there's so much interconnectedness between them, right? So I'm interested now in preventing arrhythmias, preventing and treating arrhythmias, reversing arrhythmic conditions, and then also preventing and reversing all cardiac conditions to the extent that I can.
And I'm going to just quick interject in there, because that's just so incredible. Just, you understand now the difference between your old kind of practice and your now new kind of practice. But in order to do that, I'm sure you would agree with that, you're also probably wiping out every other medical condition that they have by addressing that.
Exactly.
Because it's all insulin resistance manifesting in different physical and different mental health situations.
Yeah. And I think that our interaction early on did pique my curiosity. I mean, yeah, I kind of said that's crazy at first, but I was curious.
No, you said Brett's crazy.
Yeah, I did. But at the same time, I was still curious, and I still was open. I've always been kind of an open, I've always had an openness in terms of my mindset. Like, I don't close off I firmly believe that, settled science is religion, not science.
Can I give you an only slightly backhanded compliment to agreeing with you there?
Yeah.
But you'll laugh at this. So yes, I mean, I hear about Ryan's heart attack, and I had now known for a couple months about my new CT heart score, CAC score. And I think I'd found protocol that was going to, or people that have gone from like monster scores, 3, 4 times my kind of score, and wiped it back down to zero. And living in the state of nutritional ketosis was cornerstone to much of that. But not fearing meat, fish, and eggs and all of these different things, and realizing and understanding the nutrient density of all this stuff. So, yeah, so, I wanted to pry and learn from a doctor here. Ryan, how are you going to address this new condition that you had? And I knew that Sean, his brother, was already very vegetarian and everything, because I have constant interaction with Sean for the last 15 years. And anyhow, as he's like, well, we've got this heart history, and my dad died, and I go, yeah, I'm aware, I remember, and that's why you became a cardiologist. And then I'm like, but I don't know if everything that you're doing is that I know you believe is what's the right thing to do. I don't think it's right, actually. I think there's nuance and context here. And at this time, you're sitting there with a baggie of Wheaties on the side of the court. I'm just like, what in God's name are you doing? And I go, all that just turns to sugar the second you start putting it down your throat.
Yeah.
And you looked at me like I'm crazy. But anyhow, so here's where the funny little backhanded thing, but you were completely open to this, because over the next 2-3 months, I started sharing a couple dozen different studies and videos and all these different things. And the same way that I know I broke my brain in 2018, because I'm like, oh my God, every industry I've been a part of has done more damage than help, even though all we wanted to do, we thought we were sincere people trying to help everybody. Just like I know everybody in the medical system, there's no diabolical doctors and nurses that are trying to harm people. Just the knowledge and guidelines don't allow the healing to happen. But anyhow, so, as I'm watching over the next couple of weeks, because the 4 of us that were on that court, a healthcare actuary, your brother, and myself, we played a handful of times throughout the summer. And all of a sudden, Bill, the healthcare actuary, and I, because he was down this whole nutritional ketosis thing 15 years before I found it. And he's like, we're watching you, you'll hit a ball in the net. And just like all of us, we always get mad when we're not thrilled. We learn, but you go back, you get past it right away. But you would like look up at me across the net from you, and you'd scream, not every time, but a couple times, you go, healthcare is so screwed up. And I'm just, and Bill and I look at each other, go, he's coming around, we're getting him. And anyhow, I just thought that was kind of a funny thing. But no, I mean, because you were watching, you were paying attention, you were open-minded to taking new information in.
Yeah.
And you started to understand how obsessed I was with taking in information. And many people around me still think I'm crazy, because all I want to do is keep learning this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So,
and then I saw a lipidologist, and then I was like, once she kind of figured everything out, I was like, oh, and she suggested that I do a ketogenic diet, and I did kind of push back a little bit. And so she said, just give it a try. And she said, if you want to go ketotarian because of your fears over saturated fat, go ahead, fine. So she didn't like really push real hard, but she definitely wanted me to do a form of ketogenic nutritional therapy. I can show, I think it would be interesting at this point to show my 2 graphs.
Absolutely. Go ahead. If you feel secure in your technological wizardry.
Yeah.
Present.
Got it.
Beautiful.
All right. So it's been a little bit since I've looked at this, but let me share and point out a couple of things that I think the audience will be interested in. So I graphed out a number of metrics from age 30 to, at that time, a year ago. I'm 58 now, but this was till through 57. And I broke it down into, I'm going to again use the term potential lipid risk and then metabolic risk, because I do believe that metabolic risk carries far greater weight than lipid risk. But here's my LDL curve, the black, over those years. And was convinced to start a statin. So I've been on statin treatment since age 30. And that brought my LDL-C down into the 30s. And while there's a 10-year gap here, it's only because I just didn't check it very often. I wasn't always the most compliant patient. But I think based on these responses, when they were measured, you could make a very strong argument that I had 20 years of LDL-C levels that would make cardiologists believe that CAD would not occur.
They would say you're bulletproof.
Yeah, exactly. And Thomas Dayspring, does this on Twitter, constantly saying, get your LDL-C and ApoB to 30 to 40, and you will never get CAD. Well, I call bullshit on that. It was a while before ApoB became, testable. And so we did do that. And as you can see in this curve here, 30, mid 30s for ApoB. And then let's see here. The other one was Lp(a). So interestingly, my first Lp(a) was measured as 131 milligrams per deciliter. And that's quite high. And I do have a known genetic. Yeah, I do have a known genetic variant for Lp(a). And so from age, I think this is, 50? This should have been from here to here was basically heart attack to present day information. I do have some additional new information, which really hasn't changed too much from over the last year. But
look at that red line drop, that LP.
Yes, look at that LP.
The world believes that you should be able to do that. Everybody that's in healthcare and academia would say, well, that's a genetic purely function. You can't touch that.
Exactly. And I think that this may be a somewhat unique response, because I think that while conventional medicine believes that this is not modifiable at all, there are plenty of case reports of reductions in the 10 to perhaps 20% range through lifestyle. And it's predominantly nutrition. And it's, for me, I don't know exactly what it was, but I gave up seed oils, I gave up grains, and I adopted a ketogenic lifestyle. And
you brought in red meat again, and
I brought in red meat. I brought in probably I would say a little bit more dairy. I brought in coconut milk, so some additional sources of and eggs, and so additional sources of saturated fat. But I would say probably mostly dairy, and then some red meat and some eggs and so forth. But but I completely avoided seed oils. So it's probably not one factor, but a multitude of factors that seem to impact that for me.
Not to break your train of thought, but let me just plant a seed for a future episode, and I don't know how many down the road it'll take to get there.
Yeah.
You don't sunburn anymore, do you?
No, and I used to sunburn very easy. I don't wear sunscreen. I haven't worn sunscreen in 10 years.
Me,
6 years.
Right. Since we both went down this journey together. Yeah. And that's one of the crazy things that I've also learned is that as you get into the ketogenic world, and I know and that can include vegan and vegetarian. You can be vegan and vegetarian, because in my coaching practice, I'll work with anybody on the spectrum who wants to become metabolically healthy. And there's different ways of eating that can achieve that. But once you clear those seed oils out, regardless of what your Fitzpatrick skin type is, whether you're, from Northern Scotland and Finland, and you never saw normal equatorial sun, you suddenly, and then you can learn how to also build a solar callus, it's called. And we're not going to get into that today. It's in a whole nother episode, but just want to plant the seed for people that just taking the processed food and the seed oils, the vegetable oils, the canola, everything that says heart healthy on the package, You get that out of your system, your body starts radically healing, and it's about a 2-year health life that it lives in your fat cells. So you don't get rid of it just by stopping to eat it. It takes a little while, but now that ultraviolet B is not hitting the cholesterol in your skin and burning. It's just creating the vitamin D and the cascade of 16 other positive things. Anyhow, go ahead with where you're at. I just wanted to throw a nugget in there.
Yeah, I mean that's right on, spot on. When you look at the metabolic risk, this is what was completely underappreciated: is this bottom triglyceride HDL ratio, which was always above 2 and was actually the highest at 3.2 when I
So,
had my
tell people what you mean by that. That the triglycerides is 3 times your HDL level or 2 times your. That's what you're saying.
Yes, right. And so which fits with those parameters we initially outlined for um, reflect, values that reflect metabolic dysfunction. So the higher your triglyceride and the lower your HDL, the likely more dysfunctional your metabolic system is, the more insulin resistant you are.
Can I quick connect 2 more dots with that piece of information?
Yeah.
Because 2 aspects of looking at this. When I got back in after you and I got you to do the pulse cardiac test, and I had my year over year, and we can talk about that in a little bit maybe. But I was selling the pulse cardiac test for about a year and calling on doctors, and I got very familiar with every risk calculator for heart risk calculator that's out there. And the funny thing is, they all take the HDL number in, they all take the triglyceride number in. None of them pay attention to what the LDL is, even though all of the doctors don't pay attention to that HDL triglyceride ratio. They don't understand how the back working of that calculator is actually working. And all they tend to focus on, I'm not saying all, but is the LDL number. But also, when I mentioned earlier the metabolic syndrome, that it has to do with low HDL, high triglycerides, high blood pressure, high waist circumference, and weight. I mean, these are the things that are measuring it. Again, LDL doesn't show up there, even though we've been completely preoccupied with focusing just on LDL.
Yep.
Thought I'd just play off of that.
Yep. My A1C was always completely normal, 4.7, 5.1. Initially, my fasting insulin was over 15. I had a Kraft test, which is a 4-hour glucose tolerance test with insulin measurements that showed an abnormal curve. And these are the changes that happened on the ketogenic diet. So fasting insulin came down to 1. I flipped my triglyceride HDL ratio to less than 1, and for the audience, less than 2 is considered good. Ideal is about 1.
Yeah, 1 is rock star. It's just total rock star.
Exactly. And then going back 1 second to the lipid risk, I had NMR profiles done many times.
And again, explain NMR, because most people aren't going to know that name or that acronym.
Yeah, it's just a technique that's applied to your blood to assess lipid compositionally. So they can look at overall number of particles. They can break it down into patterns of small dense versus large buoyant. And so it's just a more detailed and nuanced dive into your lipidome, if you will. Mm-hmm. And that told me that I had a high small dense fraction, and that I was considered what they consider type B, which is what you don't want to be.
Right.
Again, it's just more evidence of this metabolic dyslipidemia, and that has now reversed to type A. So I have far less small dense particles and more large buoyant. And
again, can I inject one piece of context and nuance again, because most people aren't really familiar with all of this? Mm-hmm. For the more layman, the people who don't geek out on all this kind of stuff or don't come from a medical background, which I didn't, but related industries and sold those tests. One of my ways, and tell me if you think I'm wrong and you add context to nuance onto my context and nuance here, is that the way I look at it in the whole small dense thing is, as you know, you moved from having a higher amount of small dense particles into more pattern A, now large buoyant, what we perceive to be the healthy. To me, the way I like to think about it is if you don't treat your bloodstream like a toxic waste dump that is going to oxidize and thus work towards building a small dense pattern, that's what allows, living in that nutritional ketosis, not doing the processed oils and all the things that we know that are going to damage the cholesterol. It's not that your cholesterol, your LDL, natively wants to go and be in a damaged form. It becomes damaged based on the lifestyle and what we're doing to ourselves and the terrain, the environment it has to live within. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, absolutely. It's not just, modification of LDL, oxidation and modification of LDLs that makes it, part of the causal pathway, but it's, damage to your vascular system, your endothelial cells, your glycocalyx. And so
Absolutely. Yep.
those are all very important parts of why atherogenesis happens.
And then having damaged cholesterol interacting with all of that, not being there to do its job for repair, it screws it all up.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm like the prototypical example of somebody that can have atherogenesis despite a pretty low number of potentially atherogenic particles, right? So even though the numbers are low, they're probably damaged, oxidized, and I've probably got inflammation going on to because of my metabolic dysfunction and issues with injury to my vascular system.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, those are hugely, hugely important.
Well, tell you what,
it's why people can have low cholesterol and get atherosclerosis, and it's also why people can have high LDL or ApoB. ApoB being, ApoB is a protein that gives all potentially atherogenic particles their signature.
right.
And so you can have high for all your life. I mean, FH is a great prototype population to look at for this kind of stuff because
and again, let me, because you're just so used to living in the acronym world, because everybody you talk to also does. And for those listening this long, at the 43-minute mark, let me congratulate you for staying that long. But FH, familial hypercholesterolemia, am I saying that correctly?
Yep.
And that's where so much of what doctors get taught and why they believe LDL is such a problem. These are people with a genetically high predisposition to super high LDL levels. But one of the very other interesting things that we learn when you dive deeper than the surface level of what's kind of taught even in the cardiology area is that, yes, again, if your blood is toxic waste, and you're destroying your cholesterol and many other things, your glycocalyx, you're creating endothelial damage. Those are the people that are going to have just a ton of small dense pattern B cholesterol that are not going to allow for healing. And they might have, 20, 30 and 40-year-old heart attacks. But we also find there are people that are FH that live into their 90s with that same high level of cholesterol their whole life. So it always is the context and nuance of, it's not necessarily the LDL, it's what you're doing to your LDL. You can have that genetic predisposition, but then lifestyle can unload that gun, and epigenetically, or at least even just from what's happening in the bloodstream, you can live a ripe long age with FH and not have to, but every time doctor in my understanding and the people I talk to hear a high number, they automatically jump to, even though it's such like 1% of the population, if even, that really has the genetic disposition of FH, but suddenly doctors believe that 40% of their personal population all has FH because they're seeing numbers that they don't understand.
Yeah, the lipidologists think of cholesterol as either a production or a clearance or both problem, right? So FH is a an LDL receptor problem. So it's a clearance problem. And so you don't clear well. And so the numbers build up in the blood.
As well as with the low HDL, when that's chronically low, you now don't have enough ability to move the damaged stuff back out of the system. So you can't keep up with what's going on,
Yeah.
which again, just going in that nutritional ketosis, in that spectrum, whether you're doing it from a carnivore or a vegan standpoint, my HDLs, and this never got flagged, and I didn't understand it even with my 10 years in that business. I was in like the 22, 23, 24 range always with my HDL. And now I look back and I go, no wonder. Chronic stress, obesity, and triglycerides up around 170, 180, HDL. So I'm at like a 4, 5, 6 type of a ratio there. And at best, even much worse if you actually think through the numbers. But yeah, but now my HDL's up in like the 70 range and my triglycerides at the 70 range. I'm also at that now 1-to-1, which is really the sweet spot. And when I first started and dropped the first 45 pounds and went into my doctor, he called me up and he's like, what'd you do? Because you just dropped your cholesterol your triglycerides by like 85, 90 points. And I go, I
Yeah.
know. I go, it's just purely what I'm eating does that. So
Yeah.
anyhow, maybe now we could keep
Let me
each
just add one.
let
Let me add one thing to that.
yes.
My HDL was low 30s, sometimes even in the high 20s, and now it's also 70, which is, it's amazing, right? And it's just people need to keep in mind that it's a marker, right? It's not that HDL of 70 is, cardioprotective or awesome. It's just a marker.
It's not
a marker
magic.
that your lipid system is functioning and self-regulating.
You're metabolically healthier.
Yes, you've achieved a state of homeostasis, whatever your genetics are, right? So the low HDL was not something in and of itself necessarily harmful. Maybe it could have been, for clearance of stuff that you mentioned, but that it just reflected that I had a completely dysfunctional lipid system.
Can I have you confirm one more thing, and then I'm going
Yeah.
to suggest we move into another topic because we're getting really geeky and long on heart, and this is not only about heart, and the channel's not going to do this all the time. But one thing that I'll have people also look at me like deer in the headlights when they're like, "You don't believe in LDL cholesterol," and I just try to again create the context and nuance, and I go, please explain the difference in the cholesterol that's in your HDL, your good cholesterol, than the cholesterol that's in your LDL. And they think they're magically different things. And they're just different little rafts, lipoproteins, carrying the same exact cholesterols in your HDL as is in your LDL, as your VLDL and everything else. It's just the size of the lipoprotein and then a different marker and stuff. HDL just carries it back to the liver and out and everywhere else that we do with it. And LDL becomes a LDL after being a VLDL and so on. But it's the same exact cholesterol that's in all of these molecules.
Yeah. Give me 1 minute. Give me 1 minute to do 2 points that.
Yeah.
One is more about, right. So people, one is more about the issue of N=1. And there's a lot of people out there who have stories to tell.
And N=1 just means instead of a study of hundreds or thousands of people, this is what one person individual's results are. N number of people in the study equals one person. Go ahead.
Exactly. And I think that, I guess the message I want to give people is that I think these are powerful. And some of the best science is really rooted in these stories and perhaps unexpected observations. And if you put it another way, we tend to rely most heavily on evidence-based practice from RCTs, randomized controlled trials.
Yep.
But I think equally and sometimes even more powerful is practice-based evidence. The evidence, the thing that's in plain view from practicing and caring for patients, and the observations that you have through that practice over many years. The second point I'll make, because you mentioned LDL denialism, is I think it's really just an articulated, exaggerated manifestation of hostile feelings that many low carb promoters rightly have towards the dismissiveness of mainstream medical doctors, because the medical establishment flat out just rejects low carb diets. They may
more so a couple years ago than today. It is coming back, but it's not where it needs to be.
It's not coming back with sincerity. It isn't. If you look at,
I know, but I'm the eternal optimist, Ryan, even as much of a curmudgeon as I am.
I'm optimistic too, and I think someday we're going to get there. But right now, it's not with sincerity. You know, the ADA has it in there as an acceptable alternative, but they still can constantly promote high sugar, high carbohydrate eating.
That's who pays all of the fees that come in and made them the world's largest charity in the world.
Yeah.
The world's most profitable charity in the world. Or that's the AHA, not the ADA, but similar concept, similar result. Let's.
I stopped sharing that. So what do you want to transition to?
No, well, I want to play off of what you just said, because where you were talking about the N equals 1, and I'm my N equals 1, your N equals 1, and the power of what you do see clinically, I want to put into context a couple of different things. You and I know, and many other people, and even the people in the mainstream medical system that aren't yet seeing things the way we're describing them, what they won't argue with this statement. 94% of adults are not considered metabolically healthy because they have at least one of those 5 constellation markers of metabolic syndrome going on. And probably 40% of the population has 3 or more already, and is really, if not 40 to 60%, in full-blown metabolic syndrome. But why I bring that up is that the reference ranges that we use for the blood pressure, for the different blood tests and everything, are different than guidelines that come out of the ADA, the AHA, and all the governing committees that create guidelines. Reference ranges, which come out of LabCorp and the other different blood testing companies, are just a mere sampling of the first 10, 50, 25,000 samples that happen that say, oh, well, this is the normal range. Well, put this in context for a quick second. As a normal range, our population that's metabolically 94% ill, half of them really ill. And that's what we're saying. This is the new normal that we judge whether your blood pressure, whether your glucose, whether your A1C, all of these different metrics are. I think we need to go back and relook up what the textbook said from 1960 as far as what our normal range is, back when the average person in the population was actually healthy, because we're so far from that right now. And then the second point I just wanted to play off of, again, the N equals 1. And I think you're seeing this even so much more. Well, I want to talk about our guides and all that just for a minute after this statement. But Ryan and I were both recently on a podcast channel that has 70,000 subscribers. And like I said, you can be vegan, vegetarian, you can be carnivore, you can be 20 carb or 50 carb ketogenic, all under the ketogenic, call it, world. Okay. And there are 70,000 subscribers to this carnivore channel. And he has over 500, almost 600 videos of different people's N equal 1 experience. That, oh my God, I reversed my heart disease. Oh my God, I reversed my diabetes. Oh my God, I don't need surgery anymore on my shoulder because, and all I did was I just cut out all the crap, and because the biggest elimination diet in the world is carnivore, if you just want to call it that. And it's the eat. And like I said, you can do it with vegan as well, but just the carb amount that you're going to be bringing in through that kind of volume to get the adequate protein and everything that you need, it's just going to be hard to stay under the curve long enough to maintain as much as what you can do purely on a carnivore standpoint. So I'm not telling anybody they need to be anything. I'll work with people and help them get there based on how they personally need to do things. But where you just said, the clinical your clinical experience, if you have 500 people who go on and say, and they all fall into one of kind of 8 different kinds of categories, clusters of things that are being reversed here, there are millions of N=1s that are seeing complete reversal of almost every condition going on known to mankind. It's on the physical side of things. It's on the mental health side of things. I think of what could have happened with my mom, who suffered for 50 years being bipolar, and what a different life she could have had we been able to find this 30, 40, 50 years ago and figure this out. Not to mention the cancer that she had. My dad died of a lymphoma, and just everything going on. It's not the silver bullet that's going to solve everything in 3 months, but it's incredibly, I'll use the word magical, what can happen when somebody starts paying attention to their metabolic health and they take this into their own hands. And the only other sad relationship to that is, as I'm now working closer to full time with people, but I've been working with people for now 6 years on all of this, is I find people about 40 to 60, somewhere in there, we can call it 50, for the 94% of the population that is not considered metabolically optimally healthy. I think 2/3 of them have some form of a fairly serious sugar addiction, and I'm one of them. I know you've said you're one of them. It's like we could have our own little sugar AA meeting here. Hi, my name is Brett. I'm a sugar addict. And but this is one of the biggest and really obstacles that sit in front of people who want to address their metabolic health issues. Not only do they not recognize that almost 80% to 90% of what they're putting in their mouth turns to sugar, not to mention the percentage of when it becomes a Mountain Dew or a Coca-Cola with high fructose corn syrup, and fructose adds more complexity and problems to the body than just the glucose alone. Glucose is only contextually a problem. Our liver makes it. Every time we digest proteins and fats, the liver is going to make ketones. The liver is going to make a certain amount of glucose. If you don't eat another sugar molecule or vegetable or fruit in your life, you're going to live perfectly healthily because your body makes the exact amount of glucose you need and the matching insulin to move it, use it. And it's a master hormone. It does 100 other things as well in the body. But we can work and live just perfectly fine. And just, there's never been a cave painting of somebody hunting broccoli or a salad on any cave wall that we've ever found in the world. And again, I'm not bashing vegan, vegetarian. I'm just putting all of this into context. So why don't we wrap with just one or two thoughts here? One of my thoughts was that 2019 was what I would call, yes, your journey started when you were real young, and it started just watching your dad's life and understanding the history of your genealogy and everything. No doubt about it. But I'd say your metabolic health life started in 2019 because I got to be a firsthand witness of it. And I remember when we were at the town club for that glow ball event, and you pulled me off to the side and you're like, Brett, I've been holding out on you. And you just had me so puzzled because you did not tell me until then that you went to this lipidologist, and and she's like complete, and I got to hand you the credit also, not as backhanded as maybe the last one. Not every doctor would come back and tell their friend, I got put in my place. and everything that you were saying was right. And and that conversation led me into saying, oh my God, you wouldn't believe this. I just started writing this one guide because everything I learned over the last year, I don't have 20 hours to tell everybody what I learned. And I verbally vomit so much, there's no way I could even do it in 20 hours. So I started putting it on paper and then shared it with you, and you rewrote it and did different things with it. But I just like you to, at least before we sign off here, talk about what a difference it was. So your health system approved this guide of nothing that this health system's ever seen in one document come out before, and what kind of impact it had on you treating your patients.
Yeah. Let me start by just saying thank you. I do owe a lot of my current health status to you. So thanks for being so passionate, and thanks for wanting to help people restore their health. And I'm really excited to collaborate with you and going forward and be a part of this journey. And that document was accepted by our health system, and we used it in our clinic, and we put it on a QR code, and so it's incredibly easy to share that document. Most people come in with QR readers on their phones, and
Yep.
so at the end of every visit we share that document. And I've had a lot of patient successes, a lot of patients being successful at losing weight, getting metabolically healthier, improving their lipid metrics, making them less vulnerable to arrhythmic disease, stabilizing coronaries through direct imaging. It's been really exciting. I think I've helped more people in the last 5 years than I helped in the first 20 years. I mean, by 100-fold. No doubt. I'm absolutely convinced. And I owe it all to really getting sick myself, and to have people like you, care and get interested. And so thanks tremendously. And I'll just add a couple other things here as we kind of wrap up. But I think we're about metabolic health, and we think we both feel we're both aligned in this whole concept that metabolic health is a true fundamental requirement for total healing. And it's just that important. It's all about your internal environment. What we call terrain thinking versus germ thinking.
Yep. Absolutely.
It's about creating the conditions for healing and for self-regulating in the face of ever-changing external environments. All the things that we are exposed to, all the toxins in our world, etc.
Non-native EMF. Blew my mind the last 2 years. I mean, just blew my mind. Go ahead.
Yeah. And, I'll wrap it up by saying that, metabolic dysfunction is at the core of the what they call the 4 apocalyptic conditions.
Mm-hmm.
Cancer, neurodegenerative diseases, metabolic disease, and heart diseases. And, insulin resistance is really the epitome of homeostatic disruption. And it's amazing how the medical establishment just completely ignores it, right? It's a problem of cut points, as we've talked about, right? 6.5, you're magically diabetic based on an A1C, which is a glucose-centric measurement. So one of my messages is to implore everyone out there to question and ask, and everybody should be getting fasting insulin measurements. It's such an easy fasting insulin and glucose together will give you a score.
Yeah. Craft is the ultimate, but yes, you can
Craft
get
is the
there with a
ultimate,
HOMA IR and a fasting.
but the easiest is a HOMA IR, which all it requires is a fasting insulin and glucose. It's such an easy blood test measurement. It's cheap, and
your insurance covers it. It's paid for.
Yeah. It's insulin centricity, not glucose centricity. You saw my A1C. It's 4.7, and I was insulin resistant. So come on, I was sick for probably 20 years and didn't know it.
I remembered you showing up with your CGM, continuous glucose monitor, on that year too, or the next summer. Actually, it was the Pulse summer, and because if you also recall that first time when I saw you eating the Wheaties, and one of the first questions I asked was, "Are you a diabetic?" And you go, "No." And then the next year you're showing me your CGM results going, "I was so diabetic, it's unbelievable." But nobody knows. Nobody knows. Yeah. Anyhow, can I throw a cherry at the top?
Yes.
I thank you so much for doing this with me. I know it's because of both of our passions for all of this. We geeked out quite a bit on coronary artery disease, on atherosclerotic plaque, and all these different things. And God, we could do 10 more hours on it because we haven't scratched the surface, even though your eyes might have glazed over with all of this. But let me just kind of set the cast for what's going to happen moving forward with all of this. As we talked about, almost every major thing that happens in a healthcare interaction with the doctor is centered around your metabolic health. And if you suffer right now from any form of mental health standpoint, please go look up the Metabolic Mind podcast, and you'll see Dr. Georgia Eating, Dr. Palmer, that I showed you the book. Edie's is at my friend's at the moment, but you will see research, PhDs, scientists, psychiatrists, psychologists putting mental health in complete remission. Ryan's already confirmed this happens with the heart space. We were just talking about, I had a meeting with a nurse who's big time into this and she reversed a 360 plaque CAC score in 3 years on the Lion diet, just eating red meat, water, and salt. So this happens. This is out there. I'm presently in the process of writing a book on metabolic therapy. I was going to write a book on ketones and ketosis. And then I started really realizing, one, there's some incredible books that are already out there that cover all of this, and some of them are on my back bookshelf here. But once I really started connecting the dots and really getting into that metabolic health means mitochondrial health, and everything that interplays with the mitochondria is critical to everything. But then I started realizing the amount of what Tom Seyfried is doing and everything, using the Otto Warburg and the Warburg effect, and the Nobel Prize won in the 30s, and all of this stuff for cancer, and that Parkinson's and Alzheimer's. I'm not saying in 3 months somebody's not going to have Parkinson's or Alzheimer's, but there's things that are considered metabolic therapy, not just what you're putting in your mouth, but other things that can tremendously improve all of these things. And our goal is, yes, we're going to have an episode one day on just saturated fat and go 30 minutes. Here's why it's probably the healthiest form of energy you can place in your body. God, have we been wrong on that in the world? But we're gonna cover a lot of different things. We're gonna go through pretty much every chapter, the cancer areas. We're gonna talk about Parkinson's. We're gonna talk about Alzheimer's. Anything that metabolic therapy can touch on and help, we're gonna try to give. We can't deep dive it all into every single nuance and context out there, but we're gonna cover it, and we're gonna give you a little bit of a roadmap so that if you or one of your loved ones is coming up with those challenges and you want to help them or help yourself, we're going to try to point you in the right direction. My book's not ready yet, but I've got rough drafts of all of the different chapters, more in almost user guide formats that I need to polish up. But if anybody you can find us and you can find me, you see where it says My Metabolic Life with Brett Smith at the tag here. I have a website called mymetaboliclife.com, and that's my coaching website, and my phone number, and you can hit contact me on the bottom and send me an email if you want some of this information instead of waiting, because it's going to take us months to a year and a half to start getting into all of these different things. It's just too much to do in between our schedules. You wouldn't believe how much it took just to get to here. And we decided to do this back at Thanksgiving. And you can see Ryan laughing because it's been an interesting journey getting to right here. But it's going to be an interesting journey trying to keep this going and get some great content and useful information out there. But Ryan, even on some of the podcasts that we've both been on, I've had people reaching out to me to say, I live in Utah. I want to be Dr. Ryan's patient. How can people find you out there?
I am with Utah Valley Intermountain Health, so the Provo-Orem area. I think if you just Google me, you should be able to find information regarding our cardiology department at Intermountain Health, Utah Valley,
in Provo.
And I see not only arrhythmia patients, electrophysiology patients, but we also are involved in a cardiometabolic program. And myself and Dr. Nirmal Sankara are leading that effort. And I think that will be a nice thing as well. We're going to be posting this to the Metabochondriacs YouTube
channel. Right? I'm going to also throw it on my personal one as like an introductory to my Metabolic Life podcast. So it'll go there, and we have to do just 10 seconds of house cleaning here because we didn't talk about this at the beginning of the onset. Yeah. When you hit pause, don't close, because it's going to need to process this whole recording and everything and save onto your computer so we can use it. Maybe we'll edit that out. Maybe we won't. But everybody, whoever stuck this far through us, please subscribe to the channel. You'll learn of future podcasts if you're finding this metabolic journey interesting for yourself and for those that you love and can touch. And we look forward to seeing you again soon. And you're still planning on doing your own individual channel, Ryan? What's that going to be called?
All Things Metabolic. We'll probably post it there as well, and we'll see how much time I have to do both. But my probable journey is another 7 years in my clinical practice, and then maybe beyond that, I'll become just a podcaster. And it'd be interesting I'm pretty sure there's a capability of getting licensure in a block of states. I have to look into how that all works yet, because now I'm just licensed in Utah.
Right.
But having a license more broadly across the U.S. and
there's a lot of metabolic health doctors who are performing on online clinical stuff in all 50 states. So it can definitely be done. It's just a matter whether Intermountain will allow it or not, I guess. So
I can retire in 7 years, I think.
Maybe you can come and live the good life too. So, hey, everybody, we're going to sign off here. Ryan's going to hit pause, and we're going to then get on the phone and make sure we don't destroy this last hour and 14 minutes of finally getting something recorded. Thanks for joining us today. We hope to be back in the near future, and share this. Let us reach out if you want help or assistance. This is what I do full time. So thanks a lot, everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you.